that the police were biased. Zero racial differences. I just refused to lie.
National Defense Authorization Act has been passed in the House, where senators are pushing for women to be drafted.
Crazy Biden old man moments.
You have to be insane, delusional, a liar, et cetera, to deny the reality in front of our face at this point.
Yeah. I've never recovered from finding out that the food pyramid was a scam. Degree to which that's a scam, is there a worse medical crime in history than that?
When you're talking about this DEI BS,
truth will set you free. I think the truth will come out, and all the DEI checking all the boxes is going to fail.
I want to actually look at what they're trying to claim here, that Donald Trump is a felon who is just looking out for himself.
I think one of the finalists, should Joe Biden step aside, if not the finalist, and I'm going to back it up, they honestly believe Hillary Clinton won in 2016.
I love when worlds of lunatics collide.
If he decides that he's going to go after you or me or anybody who's well known.
Elon Musk calls for electronic voting machines to be eliminated.
We spend more on education per pupil than any other country, and yet we're terrible at it.
It's the same reason that TikTok got banned. You know, this TikTok ban, if you think about it.
I thought on Triggernometry, Roland, the heavyweight economist from Harvard, breaks it down real clear. He's dropping facts about his findings that challenge the narrative his analysis shows. Black and Hispanic folks aren't more likely to catch bullets from cops than white folks during interactions. This ain't just talk. Frier's got the PhD and the research to back it up, schooling us on what the data really says. Hit the link for the full scoop on this eye-opening episode.
You do this one study about police brutality and police violence against black suspects in particular, and then you're suddenly under police protection for over a month, and all sorts of other crazy stuff happens. Tell us about that. What happened?
It started back in 2014, and there were protests happening around the country, and I wanted to do something, but protesting's not my thing. But I wanted to do something that I thought would help. So I thought this was going to be the easiest thing I'd ever done. So I went and tried to collect some data, and I thought I was going to be able to show that the police were biased very easily. And I grew up not liking the police, so I just thought this was literally the easiest thing I'd ever done. Made arrangements to figure out how to actually do ride-alongs with the police. And so here we are on the ride-alongs, and I'm embarrassed to tell you, after a few hours, I became the worst police officer you could ever imagine, right? Everyone I saw looked like a criminal, right? Like I was going around, the cops were like, you really should not be a cop. And then we gathered literally millions and millions of data points on police use of force. What we found was that in the kind of non-lethal uses of force, so pushing someone up against a car or drawing your weapon on them but not arresting them or pushing them on the ground, those types of uses of force, there are large racial differences. There's real racial bias. Just here in New York, a black person during that time was 50% more likely to have force used on them in any given interaction with the police officers. That was lower level uses of force. But then we also collected data from 16 different cities across the US on lethal use of force. And in those in those situations, what we found was zero racial differences in police use of force. And that is the part that made people really, really upset.
Lack of bias made people upset and angry.
Yes. I talked to a newspaper reporter before the paper was even public. And he says, I wouldn't write about this. The first part's obvious and the second part's wrong. We released those results. Not only did we think we did a rigorous job in the actual analysis, but then we literally, when we got these very surprising results, hired new research assistants, had them do it all over again just to make sure that they were robust. I wanted to be sensitive about putting results like this out into the world because they were also counter to my own beliefs. Interesting part was there were thousands and thousands of emails that came from places like Kansas and Colorado and everywhere across the US who said, wow, thanks for actually using data to shed at least some light on this. How upset fellow academics got. Said before, I was taken to the side and said, you're going to ruin your career. I naively thought we were in this to actually develop a set of facts. I actually thought that's what tenure was for. At that point, I thought tenure was for going after the truth, even if it was unpopular, and that the university was going to protect you from whatever may come of you being a real social scientist, or at least following the facts as you saw fit.
Posing this in a very kind of devil's advocate kind of way.
Please do.
My read of you is you're someone who cares about the truth, who's prepared to be the outlier, who's prepared to say the unpopular thing from various conversations that I've seen you have. So how true is it that you did this study out of a desire to, I'm gonna like find something out here that's gonna be different to what everyone else is saying?
The exact opposite. It was, wow, I'm going to finally find something people are going to like me. I promise, I do not get up in the morning thinking, let me try to stir the Kool-Aid today. I'm not scared to say what I believe is the truth, but I'm not an instigator. I'm not a, people, I hate when people call me controversial. I don't want to be. I think people who stick to bullshit, even though it doesn't fit the facts, that's controversial. I literally thought this is going to be the easiest paper I'd ever written. The most important thing is, I'd do it all over again, 100%. But because I just refuse to lie. I've been doing this for 21 years, 80 plus hours a week. It's hard enough empirically to figure out what the truth is. I'm not gonna constrain myself for only those truths that are in a nice box with a particular bow. Can't do that. We're trying to solve problems. This is about whether or not we can actually get police to change and actually get folks in the neighborhood to understand, yes, there are some issues, but the biggest threat in the world is not their police officers. And can we come together to make the country better?
Who was coming after you? Was it black people in the neighborhood? Was it white academic, the media? Was it all of those at once? Like, who gets to change the narrative from you're sitting in the White House to suddenly you're some kind of demon monkey?
All of the above. Disappointing thing that happened, in my opinion, was that the standards of evidence start to change when you don't like the result. And so this cherry picking of what's good and what's bad, not based on the fundamentals, but based on the output, that's the part that's most concerning to me.
You're someone who's interested in pursuing the truth, who found himself in a politicized environment. This will sound perhaps like a strange comparison, but as someone who grew up in the Soviet Union, that's exactly the environment that people operated under. Not on the merits, but because it was the tribal thing at that particular moment in time.
The National Defense Authorization Act has been passed in the House and already generating controversy, but the big push is now coming from the Senate side, where senators are pushing for women to be drafted. Senators push selective service registration for women in National Defense Authorization Act. This is the United States Senate Committee on Armed Services for the fiscal year 2025. The executive summary published June 2024. Ladies, I hope you are ready to be drafted. It's a little early. Okay, the House has passed the NDAA. The Senate will have to pass theirs. We don't know if this will actually happen. They try all the time. They tried almost 10 years ago to make it so that women must be drafted. And it failed every step of the way. Why? Because feminist voters, Democrat women, will never vote to send themselves to war. The overwhelming majority of men right now probably would not vote for the draft. Well, the system is completely broken. We are not fighting for some great patriotic cause. It's international conquest, American hegemonic power. It is oil conflict. Not too many people are revved up to defend the international financial machine. One of the big problems is feminism. If you were to say right now that we'd have a vote on the draft, should men be drafted? Men are going to vote no. Many women are probably going to vote no as well because they don't want to be drafted. And they know if they ask for equality, they get drafted too. Guys are going to say, so long as women don't get drafted, why should we? You want equality? This is the game we will play.
Some crazy Biden old man moments. Biden at the G7, where historic gathering of some of the most unpopular leaders in the entire world. Well, what everyone's focusing on here is this very strange Biden wandering off moment where you could see him just basically walking away from all the other leaders and then has to be called back there by Meloni from Italy. It is the most classic hallmark of old man, kind of lost, seemingly listless. The White House is accusing everyone who is showing in this video of selectively not telling the whole story. According to them, is that he was simply just wandering off in order to give a thumbs up there to the other parachutist. They can't erase the weird optics.
Initial impression of yet another wandering old man moment is probably the accurate one.
Span of 72 hours, Biden also finds himself in Los Angeles. Right? There's a ritzy gathering, George Clooney, Julia Roberts, Biden basically being led away from the stage by Obama. Very odd meeting with the Pope, basically like touching heads with the Pope. And then here, let's take a listen to him with a TikTok guy.
And I know you're a typical press guy. You're grabbing me in front of this all of a sudden. And I trust you as far as I throw your phone. I have a good arm, man. I'm sure you can. I can throw a long way. But my point is this. Yes. I have made very clear to the Israelis what they have to do in the near term. If they don't, what's going to happen?
What's going to happen? Is the U.S. going to cut off fundings? I came because usually you tell me I have a nice suit and you didn't comment on my suit today, so I don't feel a little offended. No. Thank you. Can you step back in, sir, please? Thank you.
Being led away by Obama, weird interaction with the Pope. Then you've got him having an old man moment with this TikTok. And then look how angry Biden gets at him, threatening to throw his phone. You've got the orneriness, you've got the wandering away, you've got all of this literally happening in the span of like 72 to 96 hours. There's no spinning this away.
These are TikTok influencers you invited to the White House because
literally.
There's an assumption that they're like, going to be on your side. When he's asked a question about Israel, are you going to keep funding Israel? I mean, there's such a long pause, too, before he can marshal any sort of a response. Then ultimately aides have to swoop in and rescue him. You have to be insane, delusional, a liar, et cetera, to deny the reality in front of our face. On some key levels, he's already gone. And we know that not just because of these little clips that happen to sneak out, but because they refuse to allow him to even do, the limited interviews he was doing before. Everyone's just pretending who's around him that, no, he's vigorous and you don't see him, off camera, et cetera. Like, we're not stupid.
Well, you said you'd have to be a liar or propagandist to deny this, and we found our fair share.
It needs to be said. I mean, you have Joe Biden here with a schedule that would be brutal for anybody.
Oh, my gosh.
Any president of any age going to Europe, a couple times on D-Day and spending 5 days in France, going over to the G7.
In the middle of the personal struggles.
In the middle of the personal struggles, the Hunter trial. And yesterday, I even critics were saying, that he did a strong job, very good job representing the United States, even though, again, we have some cheap fakes that the RNC, once again, spreading vicious lies about Joe Biden. But that's who they are.
We should point those out.
That's who they've become. We will point that in a second. But Jonathan Lemire, I was struck by the strong message as well that Joe Biden delivered yesterday. I mean, the United States and our great allies in Europe have really stood shoulder to shoulder here, other than Mike Johnson and Donald Trump holding up badly needed security aid to Ukraine. Now that roadblock has gotten past, and people who actually love freedom and love democracy and hate authoritarians who invade other countries, it seems to me we have them outnumbered.
Got him outnumbered. Yeah, certainly, with the most unpopular people in all of Europe. He's like, look at the strong, vigorous job. And what a tough schedule. It's like, that is the most basic schedule for a president. Yes, we expect it's a tough schedule. It's supposed to be the toughest job in the world. That's why, ostensibly, you want somebody who is strong in that job. Even more MSNBC slavish North Korean propaganda.
It's amazing because you think about the fact that the president is playing chess and the former president, at best, is playing like hungry hippo.
Yeah, well, if that, maybe Uno. I'm going to give him Uno, maybe.
Giving him Uno?
He's playing Uno.
Oh, okay.
Uno, and somebody keeps telling him draw 4. I just, it's the split screen this week, much like the split screen last week. We keep talking about the split screens that have happened. And again, much for everyone that's saying, oh, Joe Biden seems a little too old. I don't know about you, but from France, doing all these things, coming back to America, going back out to the G7 in Italy. Now he's on his way to LA right now as we speak to do another event. This is, and I don't know where Donald Trump has been. Yes, I didn't know where he's been. Railing against a machine on a stage.
It's a little bit marginal, but I think it shows that the one thing we've known about Joe Biden since he took office is this is a man who meets his moments. He met his moment at the beginning. He met his moment with the economic crisis in the wake of COVID. He met his moment with Ukraine. He has met his moment over and over and over again. And I think now, look, we're just a few days away now from that first debate. And so what the split screen is going to look like is exactly what we're going to see in Atlanta not too long from now, which is someone railing against the ghosts. Who else is in the room with you, Donald? Do you see the people there? With someone who's going to be like, you really want 4 more years of this?
It's like, I don't know what split screen they're looking
On the Jordan Peterson podcast, Dr. Jordan B. Peterson links up with Max Lugavere, diving deep into health and science without missing a beat. They chop it up about Lugavere's new flick, Little Empty Boxes, shedding light on his journey navigating his mother's battle with dementia. Max lays down the science on nutrition, obesity, and how what we eat affects our brains and bodies. Lugavere ain't just talking, he's a best-selling author and top podcaster breaking down the real deal on health. Hit the link for the full sit-down. It's a must listen for anyone serious about staying sharp and healthy.
Yeah. I've never recovered from finding out that the food pyramid was a scam. The degree to which that's a scam is there a worse medical crime in history than that?
No, telling Americans to load up on 7 to 11 servings of grains every single day.
And to find out that that was a marketing ploy by the Department of Agriculture and that they went against the advice even of their own consultants who warned them that they would produce an epidemic of obesity and diabetes, to say nothing of depression and dementia, which is exactly what we have now. I don't know what you even do when you find out that that's true.
And the unwarranted demonization of natural fat-containing foods, nutrient-dense foods like animal-sourced foods, which continue to be demonized.
Even by the American Diabetic, is it Association Society? I don't remember which
ADA,
one is still pushing the notion that diabetics can eat carbohydrates. Like, actually, I don't think so. I don't think that's a very good idea since they're converted to sugar.
And then they're essentially glucose intolerant, right? Like it's madness. And you know, with that demonization of these like natural whole foods, I mean, we live in a time where 60% of the calories that your average American consumes comes from what are called ultra processed foods.
Right.
So
the center of the supermarket.
The antithesis to whole foods, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that we're still demonizing whole foods to me is insane.
What's the percentage of Americans now who are obese?
By 2030, 1 in 2. And this is not just overweight. This is like frank obesity.
And so the morbidly obese will be 1 in 5?
It's unbelievable. And obesity is a risk factor for
everything.
Pretty much everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the cure isn't fat positivity.
No. You can be more or less healthy at any given size, but it's less healthy to be obese.
Yeah.
It is a disease, and it's a strong sense of empathy for them because, you know, they're being gaslit. What you hear over and over again is this idea that all foods fit. There are no such thing as good foods or bad foods. And that might be true at a population health level, you know, I mean, like, and there's no single food that's going to cause obesity in an individual, right? It's a dietary pattern, typically involving the overconsumption of these ultra-processed foods.
Well, you're more likely to overconsume the foods that are, what would you say, pathologically delicious. Right, and they'd be made pathologically delicious. The high sugar foods in particular. It's very difficult to resist them, and no wonder.
Most physicians are, in fact, technicians, you know, and many, but not all, physicians have become paper pushers for the pharmaceutical industry.
Well, and you can understand that in some sense. I mean, before the pharmaceutical companies were utterly corrupt, they did serve an educational function for general practitioners, let's say, who were overwhelmed by their practice and who didn't have the time to keep up on the relevant literature on each disease. And that's not surprising because that's really hard. It does mean they can be captured, and that's certainly happened. The etiology of dementia in general and about its prevention, because that's going to be, both of those are going to be news to virtually everybody who's watching and listening.
Depending on where you look, the estimates are that at least 40% of dementia cases are attributable to what are called modifiable risk factors. Your non-modifiable risk factors, which are your age. You know, age is still the number one risk factor for dementia, unfortunately, today. Gender, women are at twice the risk as compared to men. And your genes, you can't change your genes, although you can change your expression.
Right.
You can influence the expression of your genes, right? But those three things, age, gender, genes, you know, those are your non-modifiable risk factors. But then you have about 12, if not more, modifiable risk factors. So these are the risk factors that essentially fall under your control. You have a degree of agency. And that is, I think, what is so exciting and empowering. Discuss a few of them. Obesity, for example, that's one of them. Well, there is an association. So as waist circumference grows, there seems to be an inverse relationship between total brain volume, adiposity that you accumulate around your viscera. I mean, that seems to be the most pro-inflammatory. Type 2 diabetes is another modifiable risk factor. Hypertension, So high blood pressure, about 50% of adults today have hypertension. But we know that, lifestyle modification, dietary exercise, for example, all are, as effective as drugs. When you have hypertension, essentially the blood vessels that are supplying blood, nutrients, oxygen to the brain are essentially damaged. And so, hypertension is incredibly damaging to the brain. Nutrition is one slice of the pie. And so among the modifiable risk factors, you have, non-nutrition related risk factors such as exposure to excessive air pollution. With regard to your cardiovascular system, we know that what's good for the heart is good for the brain. Conversely, what's bad for the heart is bad for the brain.
You should tell people what a whole food is, just so they know.
Yeah, so whole foods don't have extensive ingredients lists. They are the ingredients. So these are the foods that you tend to find around the perimeter of the supermarket.
Stay away from the aisles in the supermarket.
Yeah, I mean, you could dip in, now and then to pick up some nice extra virgin olive oil, which has a ton of evidence, in terms of its brain health benefit.
Okay, so you could go to the aisles in the supermarket for extra virgin olive oil, but that's
vinegars, spices.
So a diverse range of colorful whole foods.
Yes.
Plants and animals.
Yeah. I think that red meat is a health food. It is an incredibly nutrient-dense food. And so I think that's an incredibly important food. But
right, so it's remarkable that that's been demonized. The demonization doesn't quit. It was driven by idiot quasi-scientists and people who are maneuvering in the same domain as the food pyramid liars. But now the climate people have got a hold of it as well. But red meat is definitely it's the target of propagandists continually.
Protein is massively important.
Yep.
There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate, which isn't to say that you shouldn't eat them.
Right, but it's very strange that's not essential.
And also, you look at the data, and beef consumption in the United States has declined over the past few decades. It's on a downward slope, and yet we continue to blow up. We get sicker, we get more obese, and it's a whole food at the very least. It's a pristine source of dietary protein, comes concurrent with all kinds of nutrients that we know play a role in good health. It's actually, it is a source of phytonutrients. Most people don't realize this, but the phytonutrients that a cow ingests makes its way into the tissue of that animal, just as it does us. Creatine, taurine, carnitine, carnosine. These are all, I think, really important nutrients, and it continues to be demonized. Some people will say, oh, well, it's a source of saturated fat. Fascinating that 3% of the saturated fat that your average American consumes comes from steak. The vast majority comes from what are called mixed dishes, ultra-processed foods. I think the demonization of red meat is a real shame, and it's a big problem. And the evidence that's used to demonize it is incredibly weak.
As is most nutritional science. Stunningly weak. Yeah. Correlational studies in the field of nutrition are not helpful.
On the PBD podcast, it's all about the real talk. Donald Trump's promising no tax on tips, while Los Angeles pulling down traffic signs said to target the LGBTQ. Mark Cuban and Bill Ackman throwing down over Joe Biden's moves. Plus, Sandy Hook families taking on Alex Jones over social media. Check out the link for the full lowdown.
Right now, when you're talking about this DEI BS, Scale AI CEO explained why his company will hire for MEI, not DEI. DEI stands for what? Diversity, equity, and what? Inclusion, something like that. MEI stands for merit, excellence, and intelligence. Scale AI CEO Alexander Wang announced a hiring policy focused on merit, excellence, and intelligence, contrasting with the popular diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Wang emphasized Scale is a meritocracy, and we must always remain one, adding talent is our number one input metric. Wang's MEI policy has garnered praise from industry leaders, including Musk and Jerry Tan. Wang stated no group has a monopoly on excellence. A hiring process based on merit will naturally yield a variety of backgrounds, perspective, and ideas, arguing that treating candidates as individuals, ensuring fairness and respect. Scale AI, valued at $14 billion, has achieved significant milestone, including partnerships with OpenAI, government contracts, and a recent $1 billion funding round.
The entire stock market is a meritocracy. Either you have the numbers and the performance to back it up, or you don't. And it takes great people of all backgrounds, measured very simply. Do you have the merit, the excellence, and the intelligence for that job? Because we want to put a whole bunch of them together. And when we sit here and suddenly want to talk about, DEI, and it's about feelings, and it's about hidden political agendas, we're missing the part that it's about merit. Scale AI is saying, if we want to be a great company, I need great people. And I'm not going to be bullied, which is a lot of what he talked about, into DEI. I'm going to put great people on the ground and build a great company.
The truth will set you free. I think the truth will come out.
out, and all the DEI checking all the boxes is going to fail. And just like you see what's happening in the House of Representatives, congressional Republicans introduced the Dismantle DEI Act by Senator J.D. Vance, aiming to ban all DEI programs and funding in the federal government. So it's going to fail, it's going to die, and DEI must die.
Because it's reverse discriminatory.
Correct.
J.D. Vance is right.
Illegal immigrant from El Salvador charged in rape, killing of Maryland mom of 5. Victor Martinez Hernandez, a 23-year-old illegal immigrant from El Salvador, was charged with the first-degree murder and rape of Rachel Moore, a Maryland mother of 5. Sheriff Jeffrey Galler announced 5 hours after meeting with Moore's family. Police in Tulsa, Oklahoma, arrested Rachel's murderer. Criminal background: Martinez Hernandez had a violent history with DNA linking him to a March 2023 home invasion in LA and a murder in El Salvador in January of 2023. Galler stated he brutally attacked a 9-year-old girl and her mother. That was our first DNA match, linking Rachel's case to one in LA. Criticism of immigration policies: Sheriff Galler criticized the U.S. immigration policies, highlighting the failure to protect citizens from criminal crossing the border.
And I want to now direct these comments to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and to every member in both chambers of Congress. We are 1,800 miles away here in Harford County. We are 1,800 miles away from the southern border, and the American citizens are not safe because of failed immigration policies. This is the second time in just 2 years that an innocent Harford County woman has lost her life to a criminal in our country illegally.
So I'm tired of all these people going, oh, it's not that big of a problem. This guy, Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez, 23 years old. Peter, he has a connection to a Salvadorian street gang and has a violent history. Okay, he crossed illegally into the United States in February 2023 from El Salvador after he reportedly killed another young woman from his home country. So he murders somebody there. He can easily come here because the border is wide the hell open. A month later, this is what they didn't report. A month later, he brutally attacks a 9-year-old girl and a mother. This keeps happening. An illegal migrant has been arrested for raping a 13-year-old girl at knife point out in broad daylight, and guess where? New York City. Okay, he came from Ecuador. And then an illegal alien that was involved in a fatal highway 285 crash in Colorado had been removed from the United States. Can anybody guess how many times he was in here, kicked out, and brought back in?
How many times?
16 times.
Trump is absolutely right on immigration. You know, it only takes 4 to 8 years to realize, maybe we should have built that wall. Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't know. Maybe this open border policy ain't exactly a good look, because I think under Biden, I mean, I can't, every time I try to check the number, it's like, it's actually another million more than that. Whether it's 5, 8, 10 million, it's way more than happened under Trump, that happened under Obama, that happened under Bush. It's actually pretty shocking, the amount of numbers of people that have come to the country. And then you would think it's just South Americans, Latin Americans. They're finding Chinese, Turkmenistan. They just found out there was 5 people from Turkmenistan, from one of the Stan countries, that are literally terrorists that are tracked to ISIS-K that did the bombing in Russia.
Claiming that Biden's going to step out and someone's going to come in his place. And the one person that could be the one taking his place is a guy named Gavin Newsom. California has doubled our National Guard at the border that are working to stop the fentanyl while the GOP plays games and Mike Johnson searches for his spine. We're out here doing the work. Reminder that the GOP has refused to secure the border. They voted against 1,500 additional Border Patrol agents and CBP officers, 1,200 immigration and custom enforcement personnel, technology to stop the fentanyl. You know, only thing that they're interested in is playing politics. Oh my God.
This whole damn border debate is made up. It's made up.
California is poised to be, if this proposal is supported, the first state in the country to achieve universal access to health coverage. So what does that mean? It means full scope Medi-Cal, including long-term care, IHSS, behavioral health to all low-income Californians, and regardless of immigration status.
Bingo! H.R. 2, which was an actual border bill, was passed 2 years ago, and both Biden and Schumer refused to allow for a vote in the Senate. Biden EO is a PR stunt that still allows 1.75 million invaders per year. As always, you're full of shit, Gavin.
The Biden swap is getting ready, warming up in the bullpen.
The problem that I have is that whether it's Gavin Newsom or whether it's going on in New York, whether it's these sanctuary cities, why are they prioritizing immigrants over citizens? They're giving them money. They're giving them shelter. How much did they give them in the debit card? $10,000. They're giving them homes. They're shutting down schools to accommodate these people.
The number of Americans filing for jobless benefits unexpectedly spikes to 10-month high. Now, that is actually a good sign if you want interest rates to lower. The number of Americans filing for unemployment and benefits increased from 13,000 to 242,000 the week ending June 8, the highest level in 10 months, surpassing the pre-pandemic average of 218 and indicating a potential cooling of the labor market due to high interest rates. Contributing claims, those filed by Americans consecutively receiving unemployment benefits, rose by 30,000 to 1.82 million for the week ending June 1st. Bill Adams, chief economist for Comerica Bank, stated that while jobless claims are volatile, this increase might signal a sustained higher unemployment rate. Despite the surge, the labor market remains historically tight, with the economy adding 272,000 jobs in May and the unemployment rate ticking up to 4%.
First of all, the big number to look at is now we have 1.82 million people sustained unemployed that are actually being counted as receiving benefits. That's a big number. Pre-pandemic, okay, this is the fall. This is Q4 2019, was 218,000. Now we're up to 242. Now we have more new unemployment benefits being filed each week and the highest level in 10 months. Why is this good for interest rate? But what it means is that when unemployment goes up, now there's extra people available for jobs. Usually wage growth usually stalls a little bit, and wage growth is tied to inflation because wages go up, business employs a bunch of people with wages going up. They raise the price of the product. There's inflation. Wage, product, and the cycle. Could lead to maybe the Fed making 2 cuts between now and the end of the year.
And then Karine Jean-Pierre, the worst DEI hire in the history of DEI hires, comes in front of the White House. Mind you, everybody out there, you guys all saw exactly what happened. Joe Biden is stuck like he always is. Obama had to grab him and then guide him all the way and basically get him out the thing. Look at what this clown says about what happened.
There were 2 instances in recent days where leaders, former President Obama and Georgia Maloney of Eerily, they physically put hands on the president to guide him and show him, give stage directions. Are they doing that on their own, or has anybody asked them to run the show like that?
First of all, let me spoke to the most recent, right? And as we saw on Saturday, President Obama's office put out a statement. So I would refer you to that statement about what was being accused in those.
We didn't see it with our eyes
by others, and he said this did not happen in the sense of what people were saying they were seeing, right? Or what was being falsely reported that they were seeing. Let's not forget, President Obama, President Biden have a relationship. They are friends. They're like family to each other. And I think that's what you saw.
Oh, okay.
You saw the president put his hand on the back of President Biden, and
she's reading.
And they walked off the stage after taking questions.
She's like, they're deep fake. Like, there's a lot of deep fakes happening right now. This is her saying to us, this is how stupid they think that you are. You didn't see what you saw because Obama put out a statement saying that's not what you saw.
Conservative Washington Examiner did call them out as well, calling out the New York Post. Ironically, several recent cheap fakes actually attacked the president for thanking troops. That is what they're attacking the president for. Both in Normandy, this happened, and again in Italy. And I think that it tells you everything that we need to know about how desperate Republicans are here.
Check it out. On this episode of Louder with Crowder, they break down the latest drama. Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre just dropped the term cheap fake to brush off Biden's latest slip-up. Meanwhile, former President Joe Biden is hitting Trump with a new ad campaign. Congresswoman Cori Bush claims she can cure cancer by touching tumors. Wild, right? And over in California, crime's so crazy they can't even fix the roads, with criminals snatching copper and metals and causing chaos with street takeovers. For all the details, hit the link in the description below.
Former Vice President Biden. He just released a new ad. Have you seen the ad? Of course you have. He spent like $5 billion running it. I want to actually look at what they're trying to claim here. That Donald Trump is a felon who is just looking out for himself. But the idea that Donald Trump is a criminal who stands more to gain personally than former Vice President Joe Biden, for me is so far around the bend, I'm amazed that more people aren't talking about it. But here is the multi-billion-dollar ad.
In the courtroom, we see Donald Trump for who he is. He's been convicted of 34 felonies, found liable for sexual assault, and he committed financial fraud. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's been working, lowering healthcare costs and making big corporations pay their fair share. This election is between a convicted criminal who's only out for himself and a president who's fighting for your family.
I'm Joe Biden,
and I approve this message.
So let's go through the claims. First off, he didn't lower healthcare costs, and he hasn't made corporations pay their fair share. He's just made corporations leave. This has been the greatest single wealth transfer that has ever occurred in modern American history. The people in the top 1% of 1% of 1%, meaning people have multi-billion-dollar corporations, they are more successful than ever. You have the shrinking middle class. The left, of course, their base is super, super wealthy. That's why 98% of Silicon Valley votes Democrat. You don't find that anywhere else. And of course, the poor who don't pay anything in federal income tax. That in between, reliably red. Did you guys know that? That in between, reliably red. So is Donald Trump just out for himself? And does Biden fight for you? Well, let's look at the actions that they have taken. So the action that both of them have taken. What do they stand to gain? Well, Joe Biden, former Vice President Biden, he's been a career politician. He's been serving government since the 1970s. Okay, let's be clear. This man has not earned a dollar in the private sector. In well over half a century, this man has suckled at the public teat. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a bad person, but it does mean that he requires that gain to make a living. He can't earn income anywhere else. And of course, there's the little overlooked fact that he used that position to enrich himself and his family. 2017, you remember this, the year after leaving the vice presidential office, Biden earned $11.1 million book sales speaking fees. He piggybacked off of public office to then making more money. Money that he had never made in his life. This is not a guy who could have gone out and sold a book. This is not a guy who anyone would have wanted to hear speak at a cocktail party, let alone at some kind of a business function. Hunter used his dad's influence to multi-million-dollar deals, right? Burisma, CEFC, China Energy. This is what Joe Biden has stood to and has repeatedly gained. Let's look at Donald Trump, what he stands to gain. Donald Trump took a huge pay cut. You cannot say that he is a corrupt billionaire who is part of the 1% and then say that the man stood to lose nothing running for president. Took a massive pay cut. And by the way, the $400,000 salary, which is where, I don't know if you know this, the top marginal tax rates increased under Biden. Exactly the presidential salary. Why is nobody else ever talking about that? It's crazy to me. Donald Trump donated the entire presidential salary to charity. And he only received a paycheck of $1.
Don't forget, it's not just his wealth that he had, his popularity.
Yes.
Like, he was widely popular in all kind of walks of life. He was featured in rap songs and videos and doing parodies of himself on Saturday Night Live, like obviously The Apprentice. Everything that he touched was great. Nobody had really a whole lot of bad things to say about Donald Trump, or if they did, it was kind of minor stuff. Nobody paid much attention to it. The minute he starts to run, of course, he becomes public enemy number one.
And of course, his personal net worth decreased, depending on the numbers you use, anywhere from $1 billion to $2 billion. Let's call it $1.5 billion. So,
you know what they really hate? You see that spike on the right? That's when I believe Truth Social went public.
Yes.
They're like, gosh, no!
Son of a crap.
Made $5 billion.
So that's one component. Donald Trump is out for himself. The other component is that Donald Trump is a criminal. Let's look at this. Let's look at the crimes, really, of Donald Trump. You're talking about, when they say 34 felonies, you mean the felonies that you created. You're talking about falsifying business records, is what they claim, which no one can actually really point us to the actual crime committed here.
By the way, 34 was because it was a check, and then it was a memo that talked about the check, and then it was a filing with their accountant, and then it was a doc. That's the 34 felonies.
Right. And then there's another crime that they said there's another big crime, but we were never actually allowed to know what that crime was. And the judge just allowed the jury to assume what the crime was. And of course, President Donald Trump was not allowed to bring in expert witnesses. The point is, these crimes can't really be named. They don't have precedent establishing these as actual crimes or felonies. And there were no victims. Let's contrast that with former Vice President Biden's crimes. This is a man who potentially, I have to say allegedly, because no one has actually investigated, was taking a 10% cut of Hunter's, remember his Chinese business dealings? That's 10% for the big guy. This is a guy who openly was withholding funding to get a Ukrainian prosecutor fired.
No, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said, I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired.
Then you have plagiarism. A lot of people don't know this. Joe Biden, he's been running for president since
for a while.
The beginning of time.
But for our good.
For our
not
good.
Not for himself at all.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. Doing it for our gain. Just
Dedicated
like taking a 10% cut from his son's business dealings. Firing a Ukrainian prosecutor who may or may not have actually potentially held some people accountable that may be involved with those business dealings. We don't know. All of this, of course, is for you. Even if you take the worst of Donald Trump, Stormy Daniels, if you believe it, Okay, the idea that there was campaign funds perhaps being used at some point to pay somebody hush money, there still is no victim in that crime. You think Donald Trump couldn't pay that money? This is an accounting issue that, by the way, they still have no proof of having taken place. No victims and no personal gain with these crimes. Taking 10%, personal gain. Withholding funding to get someone prosecuted who may actually not necessarily be politically expedient for you at that time, personal gain. Plagiarism. In 1988, this was his first presidential campaign. He had to bow out in shame because he actually used other politicians' material word for word without attributing it. He also plagiarized his law school brief. He also claimed that he was valedictorian when he was in fact in the bottom 10 or 2, depending on who you ask. Also, he showered with his daughter. Yeah. According to her diary, which has been authenticated, showers with my dad, probably not appropriate.
Check it. On the Dan Bongino show, they're asking the real question who they got lined up to replace Biden. Every time Biden steps up to the mic, he's messing up, making it more likely they'll swap him out. Bongino dives into the heating presidential race, the wild border crisis, and the deep state drama. For all the juicy details, hit the link in the description below.
I think one of the finalists, should Joe Biden step aside. Let me make my case here. Hillary Clinton, number one reason, okay? They honestly believe Hillary Clinton won in 2016 was robbed. They cheated and just didn't cheat enough in 2016. Hillary Clinton wasn't cheated. The Democrats cheated and just didn't factor in enough cheating to actually win. That's not what they believe. You're dealing with freaking lunatics. They really believe the Russians, the Koch brothers, Leonard Leo, that a bunch of conservative activists somehow stole the election. They're convinced Hillary won. I'm not the only one saying this. It's been on my mind for a while. It's because now it's making its way out there into the media. New York Post, Biden should replace Kamala Harris with Hillary Clinton. Washington Post columnist suggests. A Washington Post columnist is saying this for a reason. The Washington Post and the Democrat Party are essentially one big unhappy family. The Washington Post is part of it. They're not writing this by accident. They're writing it for a reason. But learn to read the signs and the signals. This is how the Democrat symbiote works. Media, activists, politicians. Someone in the Democrat Party gets an idea. Obama, Pelosi, all of them. They float the trial balloon to someone at the Washington Post first to see what the reaction is. They're not writing this article by accident. It happens all the time. They float these trial balloons. Second reason. So number one, they think Hillary won and got robbed, okay? Number two, they get to keep Kamala Harris as the VP. Kamala Harris, the only person she may step aside for because she's the DEI hire. How do we know that? I didn't say it. Biden said it. He said he was hiring a black female because of these diversity considerations. It was already baked into the cake. They cannot get rid of Kamala Harris. She's either going to be the VP, the presidential nominee. She wants to be the president, or at a minimum, she'll take VP again. I can almost guarantee you the only person she takes a backseat for is Hillary Clinton. Not a chance in freaking hell she's taking a backseat for Gavin Newsom. I heard they don't even like each other. They are having a really hard time with the black vote. Donald Trump, we now know in multiple polls, has been smoking it with the black vote. He's up to 20% in some polls. In the greatest electoral irony of all, Kamala Harris is not helping him, not one bit. The administration with the lowest level of black support in 50 years has a black vice president. Go to this Hill article. Who is popular with black voters? Oh shit, the Clintons.
On this week's Rubin Report, we are mixing it up with clips from all the latest episodes. You'll catch some real talk on politics, culture, and the hottest news stories. Dave's breaking down all the wild stuff happening right now. For the full lowdown, hit the links in the description below.
Over on The View, they had, I love when worlds of lunatics collide, and that's what happened on The View yesterday. So they had Rachel Maddow on, yes, that's right, The View, MSNBC, they've combined into one crazy thing, and they're freaking out. They are freaking out because they realize that Biden is going down, that Kamala, she's got a different type of brain damage, that people are waking up to the neo-racism, that people don't like their kids being sexualized, all of the stuff. So what do they have? It's fear. It's fear. And what is Donald Trump going to do to women like Joy Behar and Rachel Maddow?
So you said recently that you thought that you, as an outspoken critic, could be a target yourself. Some people think that sounds overdramatic, but I'm right there with you. I think that he is so vindictive that he will go after, however he has to, through the IRS maybe, or even through sponsors to get us off the air maybe, or you. How seriously should we be taking that?
Well, so I was asked, am I worried about me? And my answer was, I'm worried about all of us. I'm no more worried about me than I am worried about everybody in the country. I think it's bad to have somebody saying, give me as much power as you can in this country so I can use it to go after other Americans, so I can use it to go after these subhuman internal enemies and I'll destroy them. Like, that's just not a good system for anybody. And I don't think anybody's safe if that's the sort of basis on which he wants to get more power. I think that if he decides that he's going to go after you or me or anybody who's well known, we have resources. We'll likely be fine. But I think there's a pattern where he picks out individual people and effectively terrorizes them. There's Stormy Daniels wearing a bulletproof vest to get into the courthouse.
Once you have political violence, you have fascism following that.
Everything that they just claim Donald Trump is going to do to them, these narcissistic harpies, is what they are doing to him. It is what the system is doing to him by trying to put him in jail right now, right? Also, just because you become president, you don't become king. He wouldn't just magically have the power. This is social critic Camille Paglia. This is absolutely wonderful. She has, for years and years, for decades, she was ahead of what was going on college campuses. And listen to this, and just remember, this is basically 30 years ago.
The thing is, the universities...
So we don't want to sell this book, forget this.
The universities are in a state of decay. That's also advanced and transfer. I'm talking about, I have an open...
Because you're all upset about political correctness and multiculturalism and any violation of the canons. You're right down the line. You think all of that threatens what we know as a Western civilization education in our universities.
Not at all. I'm talking about knowledge. I'm talking about how the universities have abandoned what should be the center of the university, which is learning. Okay, all right. Now, I'm on the record. My last book, Sex, Art, and American Culture, had a whole transcript of a multicultural course I taught at the university. Okay, with an Asian professor. Okay, I believe in enlightened multiculturalism based on scholarship.
What's the difference in unenlightened and enlightened multiculturalism?
Okay, I'm totally opposed to any politicized agenda in the classroom. Okay, I do not want this crappy melodrama being taught to our students that Western civilization is filled with evil patriarchs, and out there are the wonderful people of color. Okay?
Well, but I don't think anyone that I know of that believes that. Well, just think of what you just said.
The new historicists, listen, you do not. Stephen Greenblatt, the new historicists, okay, who are, I mean, my God, every word out of their mouth is about the evil of Western culture. You don't know how bad it is.
All Western culture is evil, and all
you don't know how bad it is.
Asian or African culture is unflawed.
These people in the who have control of the university's humanities departments now do not believe in great art. Okay, they do not. They believe the dead white European males are just have been canonized.
Well, Skip Gates doesn't believe that.
Man, the passion that she is speaking with, and Charlie Rowe is basically like, I don't know anyone like that, and she's like, you have no freaking idea what's going on. So her point there, of course, is that at the educational level, at the institutional level, when it comes to higher education, they are brainwashing generations of kids, and that was 30 years ago. Now, what did they do, of course, outside of the universities? Well, once they brainwashed a generation in the universities, teaching all of the wrong things, and America is evil, and our founding documents are evil, the very nature of the founding was based on slavery and not on freedom and everything else. Well, what else did they do? Then they started working into the corporate atmosphere, right? And how did they do that? They brought in neo-racism by calling it DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it was actually should have been called DIE, die, because that's really what they want for white people. And the mayor of Chicago is a guy by the name of Brandon Johnson. He replaced Lori Lightfoot. Yes, they had a woman who looked like Beetlejuice, and they brought in this guy, and he has just been unbelievably horrible. In some ways, you have to admire the left, no matter how horrible they are. So Brandon Johnson, here he is, with all of the craziness happening in Chicago. He gave a press conference a couple days ago. Listen to how much money this man has spent on hair and makeup. I would also say note his hair and whether you think he needs makeup, and note who he's giving the money to. I'm fairly certain it's illegal.
Let me ask you another question. There'll be the awkward elephant in the room, and that is about the Sun-Times story last week about your spending of $30,000 from your campaign fund for hair and makeup. Can you respond to that and explain why you think that's an appropriate use of the campaign dollars? To many people, it seems like a lot of money.
I think it's always appropriate to make sure that we're investing in small businesses, especially minority-owned, black-owned, women-owned businesses. Our campaign spends money on food. We support black and brown-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, printing. There are a number of things that my campaign spends dollars on. And I'm so committed to supporting small businesses that even as mayor, just made another announcement of another $35 million available for small businesses. That's important to people, that we lift up, small businesses that, in particular, that don't always get the attention and support that they deserve it. And so we're going to continue to do that as a city. I encourage all of you in this room, support small businesses. Go get your hair and makeup done by black people in particular.
$30,000 in hair and makeup. Absolutely insane. On top of the fact that I'm fairly certain it is illegal as a member of the government, the mayor of Chicago, to choose what businesses the city does business with based on the color of the skin of the owner of the business. So the guy really should have to step down, but I know nothing really works in these Democrat-run cities. Democrats, as they lose the minority communities, they've got to replace them. And when you replace them, what would you want? Well, you would want people to be able to vote without showing an ID, and perhaps you would also want electronic voting, which couldn't be tracked. Check this out from Leading Report. Breaking. Elon Musk calls for electronic voting machines to be eliminated. Musk tweet: "We should eliminate electronic voting machines. The risk of being hacked by humans or AI while small is too high." So here you have the leading tech guy, renaissance man of our time, saying maybe we should rely a little less on technology.
Check this out. On the All In podcast, they're chopping it up with President Trump about all the major issues. They dive into the economy, talking regulations, taxes, tariffs, inflation, and de-dollarization, and tackle the federal debt, discussing growth, spending cuts, energy, and nuclear power. Trump shares his views on foreign policy, covering Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine, and China, and even talks about a national ban on abortion. He drops some real talk about COVID origins, his relationship with Fauci, the deep state, and bad deals. The convo also hits on border issues, immigration, H-1BS, and recruiting global talent. They discuss the JFK files and the need for transparency. And to top it off, Trump gives his debate predictions. For the full scoop, hit the link in the description below.
One of the things I think we heard a lot at that dinner was just the difficulty that people in business were having under this Biden administration, who just want a framework. They just want the government to tell them how to operate, and they can't get that. You got no M&A happening right now in tech. The real estate guys, they can't get loans because the interest rates are through the roof and there's a credit crunch. So I think one of the common themes we just heard across that dinner was that it was just so hard to do business right now. And I guess maybe a good place to start would just be, what's the number one thing, or maybe the top three things that you would do to kind of get things moving again?
So I'd say regulation, and taxes. I gave the biggest tax cut in the history of our country. Companies were paying 40%, 45%, including state and city taxes in many cases. And we got it down to 21%. We'd like to get it down lower, actually, but we got it down. And the revenues were better than ever, even with the lower rate. We had record revenues, which tells you a little bit about that. But also the regulations. And when I asked a lot of people, a lot of big people, a lot of corporate types, if you had your choice between just the taxes or just the regulations, where did I do better? He said the regulation. In 4 years, I cut more regulations than anybody by far, not even close. Taxes were a massive cut, from 37, 38%, if you look at it just there, to 21%. I don't think I ever had anybody say that the taxes were more important than the regulation cuts. I made it possible to build. I made it possible to do things, to invest. I was able to get companies with a lot of money outside of the USA to bring that money back in. We cut the rate, and it was crazy. The rate was like 55%, so that means if they bring the money back, they lose half their money before they even start. But it was also impossible from a structural standpoint, a legal standpoint. It was very hard. Apple's an example. They brought hundreds of billions of dollars back from other countries into the United States and invested it here. The biggest tax cuts, bigger than the Reagan tax cuts. And that's where we had the great economy, and that's where we had the most jobs ever produced.
This odd thing that happens in certain states where taxes keep going up, and then you start to see the states break, right? Productivity breaks, crime goes up, and quality of life goes down. But then people don't understand that taxation and all of those things are correlated. Do you have an idea of why that is? Like, why don't people understand universally that lower taxation is better for productivity?
Well, they don't understand it. And it's such an interesting question because you look at some of these places like Chicago and New York and LA and so many more. I hate to even mention the three because there are worse examples than that. You look at what's happened in Oakland and you look at what's happened into some cities that are disappearing. I mean, they're literally just crime waves. Nobody lives there except for criminals because you can't live there. You can't survive there. And when you look at the kind of crime that we're talking about, and then they take the power away from the police can't do anything. If they do anything to stop it, they end up losing their pension, their house, their family. They end up losing everything. They get put in jail. And we're not talking about the rogue cops who do something really bad and should be taken care of badly. Be nasty. You got to be nasty to them also. Mostly, I mean, these people, they want to really, like 99%, they want to stop crime. They hate to see it. They're not allowed to they're told not to do anything. When you see a department store that was so proud, they opened up a new store in a certain city, and all of a sudden, over the last couple of years has happened, this phenomena where 500 usually young people walk into the store and take everything. They have masks on. They walk out with television sets, air conditioners. They walk out with everything. This is a new phenomena that's taken place, and it's incredible. Look at drugstores. Look at what's going on. Like in New York, you walk into a chain. I've seen it twice. I don't walk into too many drugstores, but I used to love it. I used to love to walk around and just look at what it is, whether it's a drugstore or department store. But they told me just a little while ago, I had a meeting with some people, and they say you walk into a drugstore in New York, and everything's covered up with bars and glass, and if you want just a little thing of aspirin or if you want to buy a toothbrush, you have to wait a half an hour to get a clerk, and they open up this vault and they give you a toothbrush, or they give you, how do you do business like that? This is a phenomenon. There's never been anything like this. They didn't used to have theft of even the most minor items. They had very little theft, relatively speaking. They didn't have theft. But they had the police would arrest them if they did something. Today, they don't. They have limits sometimes. If you steal less than $2,000, you don't get arrested. So nobody steals more than $2,000. It's incredible when you see what's happened to the quality of life in our country. And it's happened so quickly. It's taken place so rapidly. Nobody's ever seen anything. But you look at retail, and I know the big deal. It used to be a big deal when a department store moved into a city, or a certain store opened up even in a town. But it's usually the Democrat-run big cities where this problem is taking place. And I don't say that as a Republican. I just say you look at the 25 cities, the top problems, they're just about all Democrat. They're Democrat-run.
And they're also high tax, high regulation states.
Yeah, no cash bail, all of these different things that have taken place. They're phenomena. It's a phenomena. What's going on? Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And it has to be stopped. It's a horrible quality of life. And on top of that, you can't walk to a store. You end up getting shot or mugged or something. The level of crime in the cities, in these big cities, is out of control. Nobody has ever seen anything like it.
One of the things we've talked about, President Trump, on this podcast a lot is the deficit. Under your administration, we added close to $8 trillion. Under Biden, it's going to be paradoxically about the same number. Seems incredibly unpopular in Washington to cut costs, but that's something we're going to need to do. What's your plan? Can you get it under control? Is there the will in Washington to allow you to do that?
Well, the biggest thing I think is growth, because we can grow our way out. As an example, we have more liquid gold under our feet. I use the term. We have more oil. We have more wells. We have more everything than anybody else. We have tremendous growth potential, and we have tremendous numbers of dollars that can be saved through efficiency. The way we're spending money, hundreds of billions of dollars, what Biden did with the trillions of dollars that he borrowed for COVID. Now, I had a different situation. We were getting ready to start paying off debt. We were getting ready to make a lot. We had the greatest economy in history. I had to throw a lot of money at COVID in order that we didn't end up in a 1929 type depression, which we could still end up in now because of what they've done. But we had to throw money out there in order to keep our country going. We would have ended up, if I didn't do that, we would have ended up in a depression. The problem is, when Biden came in, he took trillions and trillions of dollars for COVID. He didn't use it for COVID. He used it for other things. But he took trillions of dollars out, and that caused a lot of the inflation. His energy policies caused inflation, and his spending, the unbelievable spending that they did caused inflation, tremendous inflation, and it's going to have an impact for a long time to come. Education. We spend more on education per pupil than any other country, and yet we're terrible at it. We're down at the bottom of the list, and yet we're at the top of the list. I am going to, very early in the administration, we're going to send education back to the states. We're going to give them approximately half the number of dollars, and they're going to have so much money that like they've never had before, because they can spend a fraction of what we're spending right now and have much better school systems. And they'll do it for a fraction of the cost. We'll save a tremendous amount of money and have better. Some states, I don't believe, will do a very good job, but they're going to have to learn to. But we have, I would say most of our states will do a much better job. I think all of them will do better than, you can't do worse than what we're doing right now. Environmental with a lot of that, where the environment can be controlled by the states instead of this big bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. I mean, what do you do when China is burning all the coal and they're sending the ashes over the United States? Because that's what happens. It takes 3.5 days and it blows over the United States. We produce clean coal. We're going to produce clean energy. Nuclear is okay with me. And what we're doing is costing $25 billion to build a plant. The environmental people were brutal. You know, in France and in other places where they do have a lot of nuclear, they build small plants all the same, and if they need double the amount, they'll build 2 of them. No, I'm okay with nuclear, but you have to do it in a way that makes sense. And they have nuclear applications today that can be built and can be built reasonably inexpensively. Ukraine is now, I read the other day, where they don't have the soldiers, they don't have the manpower, they want to use children, they want to use old people, very old people, people that are not really perhaps equipped to fight. They're not doing well.
The average age of their soldier is like 43 now, so they're they're literally running out of people. To make a peace deal there, would you be willing to take NATO expansion off the table if that's what it took to get the Russians and the Ukrainians to make a deal? Would you be willing to do that?
So for 20 years, I heard that NATO, if Ukraine goes into NATO, it's a real problem for Russia. I've heard that for a long time. I think that's really why this war started. I'm not sure that this war would have started. Biden was saying all of the wrong things. And one of the wrong things, he was saying, no, Ukraine will go into NATO. That's one of the many things he said. When I listened to him speak, I said, this guy is going to start a war. Because as you know, for 4 years, there was never even talk of Russia going into Ukraine. That would have never happened. Russia was not going to attack Ukraine. As soon as I got out, they started to form along the lines. And I thought that Putin maybe, look, he's a good negotiator. I thought he was going to be doing that for negotiation purposes. Then all of a sudden they attacked. And I said, what's going on here? But if you look at the rhetoric from Biden, he was saying the opposite of what, in my opinion, you had to say. And he's still saying it. He's saying things that are so crazy.
Inflammatory. Yeah.
I 100% agree. And, you know, it turns out that the month before the Russians invaded, Blinken told Lavrov that the administration was not only going to bring Ukraine into NATO, but that they thought it was okay for the United States to put nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So no wonder the Russians hit the roof. I mean, you talk about provocation.
Well, let's say you were running Russia. You wouldn't be too happy. And that's always been off the table. And now I hear France wants to go in and fight. Well, I wish him a lot of luck. I think good luck.
Sir, can I ask you about Israel-Palestine? What's the right path to just resolve this once and for all and just move forward?
Again, it's so sad to me because it would have never happened. Iran was broke. They had no money. I sanctioned countries that wanted to buy oil from Iran, and I would have made a fair deal with Iran. I was going to get along with Iran. I was going to get along with everybody. We did the Abraham Accords. I think eventually Iran would have been in the Abraham Accords. We had 4 strong countries go in, and nobody went in since I got out. That whole thing should have been loaded up right now. It should have been full. They did nothing with the Abraham Accords that everybody said were great. They said, we're going to get the ultimate prize because of that. It was amazing. If anybody else did it, if a Democrat did it, they would have gotten every prize in the book. But I did it, and it was a great thing that we did. It was a phenomenal thing. But when you look at what happened now and you see what's going on, it's very, 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 very sad. That attack would have never happened in a million years. Iran didn't have the money for Hamas. They didn't have the money for Hezbollah. They didn't have the money for any of the 28 other cells of terror or whatever you want to call them. Iran was broke. The main thing is Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. That was my main thing. And you would have had peace in the Middle East. The problem is, I had them at a point where you could have negotiated. A child could have made a deal with them, and Biden did nothing. A young man that knew nothing or a young woman that knew nothing in kindergarten could have made a deal with Iran at that time. China buys billions and billions of dollars of oil every month, many billions of dollars a month. So Iran now has $250 billion cash. They made it all in 3.5 years, and now they're much tougher to deal with.
Just shifting back to foreign policy for a moment, Mr. President, on the relationship with China, it's funny how Democrats and Republicans seem to have a unified voice, and war with China is inevitable.
I think it's not inevitable. I think it's unlikely. I know President Xi very well, and we got along great. If you have the right president, we can live at peace with China. We can do very well with China, compete with China. But we don't have the right president right now. He's not respected by China. He's being laughed at by China. And he's a Manchurian candidate. I mean, he's received money from China, his family. And that makes him, to me, somebody that shouldn't be negotiating. I think he's got a conflict of interest. But no, I don't see war with China as being inevitable at all.
Think that Fauci and our government funded gain-of-function research?
So if you remember, I'm the one that stopped it. And I stopped it maybe for a lucky reason or an unusual reason. I said, why are we paying money to China? It wasn't about gain-of-function or anything else. It was, why are we paying money to China? China's got a lot of money. They want us to consider them a growing nation, a nation in distress, all sorts of things, because they always take advantage of every treaty. But they're a growing nation. Well, we're a growing nation, too. We're a nation that's becoming a third world nation based on what we're seeing. The Fauci thing is an interesting phenomenon. I was not a big fan of his.
But did Fauci lie to you, I guess, is what the American people want to know. Did Fauci lie to you? And if he did, should he be prosecuted?
I understand, Fauci was a much bigger factor in the Biden administration than he was in the Trump administration. I didn't rely on him that much because I didn't trust him. Got along with him, fine. Not really. But I didn't trust him. Again, I was the one that stopped the money going to China. I didn't like it. One of the things I can tell you, the World Health Organization, we pay them almost $500 million, and China pays them $39 million. And so I got out of the World Health Organization. They did absolutely nothing. They called it totally wrong. But it shows you the stupidity of the whole thing. And here's the big part. China totally controls the WHO. We have very little control over them. And now they want to give control over our whole country to them.
Fauci brings up sort of the kind of deep state personality that you talked about in 2016 that's kind of like riddled all over the government. And do you have goals around the deep state this time around? And what are they?
I mean, I did a lot of things in the FBI. I fired a lot of their top people, including Comey, who's terrible at what he did, a terrible person. I fired McCabe, and, I don't have to go through Lisa and Strzok, all of the lovers. And I fired the whole group of people. I got rid of them.
Border situation, you wanted to build a wall. The Democrats did everything they could to thwart that. You built the wall, but then Biden left a bunch of holes in it and then sold off the parts for scrap metal.
Yes, so we built hundreds of miles of wall, David, as you know, and we're very proud of it. We did it as per specification by the Border Patrol. They wanted exactly the wall that we did. Mexico gave us a lot of troops for free because of a certain negotiation that I had with them. But Biden, they didn't want to put up those slats that were going up routinely by us. They got rid of everything. They sold it for 5 cents on the dollar. And that's the first time that I said they're serious. They actually want open borders. They want an open border. Nobody could believe it. I couldn't believe it because I never believed they wanted an open border, because who would be stupid enough to want an open border? Look what's happened with an open border. We had the safest border in the history of our country, and now we have the worst border in the history of the world. I had a remain in Mexico policy, catch and release in Mexico, not in the United States. Everything was so good, but the remain in Mexico is a big deal, not easy to get. And now you look at what's happened. We've been overrun. It's an invasion of our country by people. Many people come out of jails and prisons. They come out of mental institutions, insane asylums, and we have terrorists coming into our country at a level that we've never seen before. They want to destroy our country.
We need high-skilled workers in this country.
Yes.
We need to recruit the best and brightest from the world. Please promise us you will give us more ability to import the best and brightest around the world to America.
I do promise, but I happen to agree. That's why I promise. Otherwise, I wouldn't promise. It's so sad when we lose people from Harvard, MIT, from the greatest schools and lesser schools that are phenomenal schools also. What I want to do and what I will do is you graduate from a college. I think you should get automatically, as part of your diploma, a green card to be able to stay in this country. And that includes junior colleges too. Anybody graduates from a college, you go in there for 2 years or 4 years. If you graduate or you get a doctorate degree from a college, you should be able to stay in this country. But I know of stories where people graduated from a top college or from a college, and they desperately wanted to stay here. They had a plan for a company, a concept. They go back to India, they go back to China. They do the same basic company in those places, and they become multi-billionaires employing thousands and thousands of people, and it could have been done here. You need a pool of people to work for your companies. You have great companies, and they have to be smart people. And we force the brilliant people, the people that graduate from college, the people that are number one in their class from the best colleges, you have to be able to recruit these people and keep the people. They can't even make a deal with the company because they don't think they're going to be able to stay in the country. That is going to end on day one.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think we all wholeheartedly agree.
On Tucker Carlson's latest, Glenn Greenwald breaks it down on how American politics is run by a uniparty trying to keep you down. Both sides ain't about that free speech life, and Greenwald's here to explain why. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and host of System Update on Rumble. They dive into everything Ed Snowden, why the left stopped criticizing intel agencies, the ACLU, Trump's impact on Republicans, the truth about TikTok, and why they want to silence Tucker. Plus, they touch on Julian Assange, Putin, the Christie Nome dog scandal, Greenwald's life in Brazil, and global authoritarianism. For the full scoop, hit the link in the description below.
It did feel to me like it was more important for the U.S. government to capture and kill Ed Snowden, an American citizen, than like any foreign terrorist.
It was the biggest leak of top secret documents from the U.S. security state by far. He like planned it so meticulous. I mean, you're talking about the NSA, which is supposed to be like our leading intelligence agency. He was in it, stealing all their stuff over months, figuring out how not to get caught. He walked out with it. He went to Hong Kong with it. They have no idea any of that happened. The only thing he cared about was getting that out before he ended up, imprisoned or killed.
Why
to get
did
there.
he do it?
I mean, I really think it's for the reasons he said. Like, he really felt betrayed. He went to enlist in the Iraq War. He enlisted in the army. He wanted to go fight in Iraq. And obviously you do that because you believe the mythology
100%.
of the country. The more he saw, the more he realized it was a fraud. People who want to go fight in wars obviously have like a code of ethics already, right? They're saying, I'm willing to risk my life for something that is greater than myself. And then when you realize that like what you're told is greater than yourself is in fact a total lie, and that you're fighting for completely different reasons, you feel betrayed. And then the question is like, what is really bigger than myself? We weren't even discussing the possibility that he would end up free. It was inconceivable. Like, that was the darkness that hung over this whole thing the whole time when we were doing it. But the whole time I felt this like sadness that this person I'd come to like admire and respect so much, I was never going to see again. He was going to end up in prison for the rest of his life. Like, that wasn't like a possibility. It was like almost inevitable.
And he knew that?
Yeah, of course. If you're at all ethical, like not just a journalist person, you don't use somebody as a source without making sure they understand the risk they're taking and the likely consequences. First conversation I had when I started talking about it, he was like all well versed in the Espionage Act and like every single law that would be used against him. He fully understood he was sacrificing his whole life. He had to hide it from his girlfriend, who he wanted to marry. That was like they were totally in love, but he couldn't have her know anything because she would have then been complicit, and he was concerned she'd be vulnerable. So he had to keep it all from her. He just disappeared.
So, I mean, you're describing like one of the most ethical people I've ever met, one of the most principled people ever.
Totally.
It's kind of revealing that he's considered
the
enemy
criminal,
number one.
Criminal, yeah, because he actually exposed real crimes, and that's what always happens is the people who expose the crimes. Do you ever hear any left liberals ever anymore talking about the evils of the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the U.S. security state? Never, ever. Maybe Homeland Security for being too like aggressive with immigrants, but other than that, like that discourse is gone. If you talk about the CIA and the FBI now, people that gets coded as like Trumpism and like warning about deep state. And like they mock the idea that there's a deep state. That's like been fundamental to left-wing politics for as long as I can remember. And now it reads as like, Trumpian right wing.
Any country run by its intel and law enforcement agencies is an authoritarian country. It's not a democratic country.
They were built to be outside of the democratic system. They're built to be a secret agency within the government, immune to democratic accountability. And the amazing thing is when they had those hearings, like after the Twitter files and all of that, every single Democrat, have you ever considered the fact that the people at the CIA and the FBI and our security state agencies are doing this to protect us, not to harm us? Even the left-wing sectors of the Democratic Party, there's no space to criticize the two primary views that I hold that used to be identified with the left that are now identified with the right is free speech.
Yes.
Which began as a left-wing movement. I mean, the free speech movement began at Berkeley. Some of the most important First Amendment free speech precedents were written by the most left-wing journalists, and like it was left-wing Jewish lawyers at the ACLU who are fighting for the most absolutist versions of free speech. And now free speech codes as a fascist value. And then the second is this critical scrutiny and focus that I've always had on the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, and that too now codes as right wing. And the reason for that is so disturbing. It's because those agencies became among the leading enemies of the Trump campaign and then the Trump presidency. That's where Russiagate came from, was from the bowels of the CIA and FBI. They were anonymously leaking every day to the New York Times and the Washington Post, all kinds of information that turned out to be false, but that was designed to sabotage Trump's campaign and then presidency. And Democrats looked at that and said, why would we have any problem with these agencies? They're on our side, and they are on that side. This inversion of politics, and then you add things like neocons almost entirely migrating to the Democratic Party, whereas when I started talking about politics in 2005, neocons were being talked about as bloodthirsty Hitlerian types, Nazis and the like. That's how left liberals talked about them. That TikTok got banned. This TikTok ban, if you think about it.
I thought it was because of China.
No. Okay. So
I'm just kidding.
Right. I know. So when it was first introduced, that was the idea, right? Like, we can't have the Chinese Communist Party
spying on us, gathering our data.
As though, like, all of that data is not available on the open market. Like, there was a big scandal that the CIA and intelligence communities were buying on the open market huge amounts of data about American citizens.
They're listening to us on this right now.
Everything is tracked. Why would China need to create an app to get all this spying information that they can buy from anywhere else? So, and at the same time, like, the people who run TikTok are pure capitalists. Like, the guy who's the CEO was born in Singapore. He went to the London School of Economics. Then he went to Harvard. He worked for McKinsey or Goldman Sachs, like a classic. All he cares about is profit. But this idea of banning TikTok has been around for 4 years, and it couldn't get passed. It was considered way too extreme, like banning American citizens who voluntarily choose to use this app to find communion, to spread ideas, to make themselves heard, to read news. Taking that away from them or forcing a sale was considered way too extreme. And yet suddenly after October 7th, instantly an overwhelming bipartisan consensus formed in order to ban it. It ran through Congress and President Biden signed it. Why? You go and ask any one of the sponsors of this TikTok ban why it finally got enough people to support it after spending so many years not even near a majority, and they will all tell you that the reason is because they became convinced that there was far too much Israel criticism being permitted on TikTok. That was the issue that became the tipping point for banning an app that 180 million Americans, a third of the country, voluntarily choose to use. It was because of the Israel issue.